Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Baumgarten, but I expect you already know that. And I welcome you to this discussion on Facebook Live, paltalk.com, and on YouTube. Well, the debate continues. Should we send our kids to school or should we not? Should the schools open or shouldn't they? Should we have reduced class size? Should we have half the classes remote and half of them in the schools, and so forth? Well, interestingly, here in New York, the largest public school district in the nation, there are teachers, there's a contingent of teachers, which I think probably represents the majority. The caucus is called MORE, M-O-R-E, and they say, let's not open the schools. It's not safe. We hear from MORE is New York City public school teacher Andrew Worthington. Andrew, welcome to this discussion on Facebook Live, paltalk.com, and on YouTube.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Oh, thanks for being here. Tell me why you don't think, because the mayor and the chancellor's waffling on this a little bit, but the mayor is saying we should be ready to open the schools. They have a plan in place. The schools are going to be disinfected. The students will be maintaining social distancing. And you and your colleagues are saying, let's not rush things. Let's not have in-school learning yet.
Yeah, so I'm with the movement of rank and file educators, and we don't believe that the schools should reopen until certain conditions are met. We think there should be 14 days with no new tests or with no new cases in neighborhoods that are reopening. We think that there needs to be major investment in financial relief, both in housing and childcare for families that need it, so that we can open with a hybrid structure safely and in a healthy way for families. We also need more funding for the schools. We're long past due for upgrades in staffing. The school staff to student ratio is outrageously large in New York. And now more than ever, we need increased funding, which is actually owed. For example, my school's owed almost $600,000. And the American Federation of Teachers estimates that for schools to reopen, we would need about 1.2 million investment in every school. So that just the amount that we're owed right now is about half of what we would need in order to open safely. But then we also haven't really had much of a voice, both educators, parents, and really the whole school community. It's been a lot of backdoor negotiations between the city and the United Federation of Teachers. And every time that new details come out, it's not very heartening for anyone involved. And a lot of the educators and families here in New York are quite frankly traumatized and completely lack trust in the city and the mayor after the mismanagement of schools that happened in March.
So let me just start off with an apology here. I said it's MORE, but you said the acronym for your group is MOVE, M-O-V-E?
No, it's MORE. I was just saying that stands for the Movement of Rank and File Educators.
Oh, okay.
The Social Justice Caucus in the United Federation of Teachers.
So I was wrong. I was right. So interesting. No, does this put you in kind of an odd position? Because generally, union members want to be able to say, we want to work. Give us work. And you're saying, let's not work. Well, you're not actually saying, let's not work. You want a different way of working. But it's kind of odd for union members to be saying, we ought not to be opening up the schools, it would seem to me.
It seems like the position that anyone who's a unionist in New York City should have. It's not safe. The working conditions aren't safe for us. And the learning conditions for our students and by extension their families aren't safe in the current situation. At my school, for example, the ventilation is very sketchy. It's been found to have soot in it. The water's been found to have lead in it. So the conditions are not good in the schools. So we all want to work. We just want to start planning right now for remote learning and remote instruction, online instruction, like most of the major cities in the United States are doing right now, right? And we feel like the blended approach that the mayor is trying to do is kind of no one's going to win basically, because the students who are in school will be in a dangerous situation, and the students who are going to be learning at home will be taught by teachers who are both trying to teach people in person and teach people remotely, right? So we really need to, and the city basically has had since March to come up with strong online instruction practices in terms of like getting people the proper technology. I had students who were learning off of iPads that the city gave them, and even then it took almost a month to get some of them the iPads. It's very difficult for my English students. I teach English and history. So it's very difficult for them to write essays on an iPad. We had some students who didn't have proper Wi-Fi connection. That was never addressed by the city. There's a lot of stuff that they could be doing to get ready for solid remote instruction. And instead, they're kind of playing this game of, oh, we're going to open up the schools. So it'll be helping these families that want it. But our argument would be that those, like, we haven't had an open conversation about that. We don't really know what everyone thinks. And a lot of the information that's disheartening about this hasn't been out in the open, really.
Andrew,
so we want to work. We just want to work in safe conditions. Yeah.
Andrew Worthington is our guest. He's a teacher in the public school system, the largest in the nation, New York, and he represents the caucus of teachers called MORE, M-O-R-E, who are opposed to opening classes. You mentioned that other school districts have elected to not open up, and we have some breaking news at this moment that in Newark, which is the largest school district in New Jersey, right across the Hudson River from where you are right now, they have just announced that they will not be opening the schools. All learning will be remotely done. So there's one large school district, certainly not nearly as large as New York's, but a large school district that is doing this. The mayor has kind of flip-flopped on all of this, because in the beginning of the pandemic, he said it's safe to go to school, but it wasn't safe to go to synagogue, church, or mosque. And then under pressure, not just from teachers, but from parents and from just folks in general who recognized that that was a contradiction, he backed off at the end of the last school year. Are you kind of surprised that he's pushing once again for the schools to reopen?
I'm not super surprised, because honestly, his rationale in March for closing the schools and then now is very difficult to decipher. He has some mystery constituency that he's trying to work for in terms of reopening the schools. But again, that conversation's not really there. There was a survey that was done a couple weeks ago, and it didn't get that much response, but it said about 2/3 of the parents wanted to go fully remote. And that was before the Nurses Association for the state came out saying they oppose reopening. Custodians have said they're skeptical about reopening. The school aides and other school workers who are represented by the DC 37 union, their union has come out against it. And now even the principals union, they're the bosses, right? They're the ones that have to actually execute this. They've said that we cannot begin school in September. It's not safe, right? I guess, so yeah, I'm not really surprised that he is still pushing for the schools to open, because it seems like he hasn't really done anything to change his mindset, and the trust still isn't there. He can't admit that he made a mistake in March. He kept the schools open a week too late. He kept educators in the building 2 weeks too late, and lots of educators died. And he hasn't admitted that he did anything wrong, and I don't expect him to.
You mentioned the nurses, Andrew, and I understand that there is a shortage of school nurses, and under these circumstances, you clearly don't want to open up a school without a nurse being there. The mayor's solution to that is, well, during the height of the pandemic, and we were short on nursing staff in the hospitals, we recruited nurses from around the country to come in, and he's hopeful that he'll be able to do that. Are you confident that they'll be able to get nurses in all the schools?
No, because he hasn't explained where he's going to get the funding for this. A lot of the discussion around the funding still centers on the HEROES Act, which has been dead in Congress basically all summer. So he hasn't explained where he's going to get the funding for this. If there was funding, we would definitely want a nurse in every school. We've wanted this for a long time, even before the pandemic. So I'm seeing that as an empty promise. I should also clarify, when I said the nurses were opposed, the UFT nurses who are in the schools, represented by the same union as me, they're opposed to reopening. But so I'm talking about the state's nurses association. So these are the ones that were hit so hard in the spring by the overflowing hospitals, and they are adamant that schools should not reopen because it has all the signs of a super spreading event, which would hit them hard again in the hospitals.
Offices have just reopened. I don't know. I haven't seen any much coverage of it, and I haven't been into work yet today. But offices, I believe, started to reopen in New York today. And I know in the building that I work in, they've put in measures in place that are supposed to ensure that we maintain social distancing. And as adult human beings, we have the ability to be able to follow those rules, even though we might scoff at them, we can follow them. But how do you take, especially younger children, and expect them to follow rules of social distancing in a school setting?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, and I'm not an elementary educator, so I can't specifically speak to that. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult to enforce mask wearing, and actually, they've already thrown in their reopening plan for the city. They've already thrown their hands up about how they're going to do lunch. Lunch will happen in the classroom, and it will happen with an educator in the room. So at least during the lunch period, no one will be wearing masks in a classroom. And then it's one of the other things, they came up with something where the educator that's supervising the students during lunch will stand in the back of the classroom behind the students, which is part of these theatrics that they're doing and to try to make it seem like everything's safe. Clearly, it's possible for particles to travel in a classroom if you're standing behind someone.
Well, it's obvious you can't. It's obviously you can't wear a mask while you're eating. So of course they threw their hands up on that one. So on the other side of this question about the difficulties, I have a question about the difficulties of teaching remotely. This is something that you haven't done. You were trained to teach in the classroom, as were your colleagues, and there are all kinds of technical issues. I mean, just you and me talking right now. We had to make sure that our connection was good in order for us to conduct this interview. I do this every day, and sometimes I lose my interviewee because of technical problems. How how astute do you think are the teachers, and how astute do you think are the students to be able to make remote learning work?
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue. Every educator I talk to would prefer to be back in the classroom teaching students. None of us think that this is an answer to be teaching online. There's a lot of difficulties. Like I said earlier, the technology that was given to students in March and April wasn't the proper technology in a lot of cases. And families also weren't given enough of a choice about what type of technology they would have access to. Just in terms of like the actual instruction remotely, one thing that could be happening right now is we could be having meaningful planning happening for teachers getting professional development on remote instruction strategies, or families to be given information about how they can help facilitate remote learning best in their own households. And that's not really what's happening. We still have these games going on of like, oh, we're going to be remote, but we're also going to be in person. So we're really not doing either of those things well, would be what I would say. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. And my final question has to do with social distancing. You said, of course, you're not an elementary school teacher, so you're not sure how the students can be kept socially distant there, but you are a secondary education teacher. And unless things have changed, unless they've changed the protocol, maybe you move the teachers from classroom to classroom rather than the students from classroom to classroom. What do you do when I leave history and I'm going to go to science? and I get into as a student, into the extremely crowded corridors. How do they obviate that problem?
So this is what I'm talking about with the mayor's plan is basically leaving it a situation where no one's going to win. Students aren't going to be doing any sort of traditional bell schedule where they're moving from one content area to another content area, from one classroom to another classroom. By and large, what I've heard from most of the educators I've talked to is that their schools are planning for students to remain in one room the entire day, where they'll have someone supervising them. You might have some situations where content instructors come in, but I've heard most of the time it's going to be the same instructor is going to be in the room, basically monitoring them, doing remote instruction work on laptops. They'll just be in person, right? So even the people that come into school are pretty much going to be doing remote instruction, at least at the high school level, and at least at the schools that I've heard from.
Well, wait a minute, this is brand new to me. So you're telling me that the students are going to be sitting in the classroom. The teacher in front of them will not necessarily be the person who teaches that subject matter. They're going to be sitting in front of computers anyway. So if I have that correct from what you just said, why the hell do you even risk their safety by opening up the schools in the first place if they're learning remotely from within the school?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the hundreds of questions that people are trying to ask the mayor, be it nurses, principals, educators, families, students. We're not getting answers. No one really knows, right? The reason for this is that we have to, a lot of schools have to put that in place is because educators have the option to apply for remote working accommodations if they have medical conditions that are listed as risk factors by the CDC. So if, for example, you have your science teacher is not there, then someone's going to have to be able to, but you're in person as a student, you being a student, then someone's going to have to be able to facilitate your in-person learning, even though your teacher is remote, right? And then this is a whole nother issue that's happening right now because some people are getting their accommodations and then other people, such as me, are not getting their medical accommodations that they've applied for, even though they're getting letters from medical professionals who are licensed, right? And it's another example of the city just not listening to the scientists and the medical professionals the way that they've said that they want to. They want to claim that they do that, but then they're not actually doing it, right? De Blasio wants to act like he's better than these people in other areas of the country who he says aren't listening to medical professionals and scientists, but he's not listening to the Nurses Association. His own director of health, the commissioner of health, resigned because she said that department and the expertise they have wasn't being heard. She resigned last week. And then now you have licensed doctors who are writing notes so that teachers can get remote accommodations to teach. And then they're also being told that they don't know what they're talking about, right? And then teachers are being denied those medical accommodations.
Well, when you say you're not getting answers from de Blasio, let me just tell you, you should not feel lonely. You're not the only one. I don't know if you saw the video over the weekend. He was in Chinatown, and the owner of a Chinese restaurant was pleading with him. And I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, this is stupidity on your part. You know, wherever you are, that there are cameras rolling, whether they're in the news media or it's just a bystander with their iPhone. And he turned his back on the guy and walked away, didn't want to answer his questions. So this is a real problem. I think the chancellor is probably a little bit more forthcoming. If you were to ask the school's chancellor a question, you might get an answer. But the mayor, God bless you if you're successful in getting a straight answer from him.
Agreed. Yep. I mean, it's just an issue of an inability to take responsibility for what he does. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a little tone deaf to the community, I think. Andrew Worthington from the MORE Coalition. I had it right the first time. From the United Federation of Teachers. It's a coalition, a caucus within at the largest school district in the nation, New York City. Thanks for joining us today. And as I like to say at the end of our discussions, everybody please be safe and peace out.